Brian? Leland talked about a headline. I guess that's something we have to record. And that's all we should have, because I'm not doing a vignette for tomorrow morning. I figure they're not going to really need one. I don't think. Do we? Actually, well, good evening, everyone. From the CBS 47 and Fox 30 Action News Jax First Alert Weather Center, I'm Chief Meteorologist Mike Buresh. Corey Simma is in the background here, so to speak, in the weather office working on some graphics, but hopefully we'll be stepping out for the rest of the night with any luck. But our First Alert Weather Center will be staffed round the clock now through tomorrow night, so we'll be here if any tornado warnings are issued and, of course, updates on Helene. That's why we're coming to you live on Facebook tonight. We'll also have all the latest for you on CBS 47 and Fox 30 Action News Jax. Fox 30 begins at 10 o'clock tonight through 11. At 11 to 11:35, CBS and Fox. We're always online, actionnewsjax.com. You can download for free the First Alert Weather app. That can be very handy for you as well. And we will be streaming coverage, live coverage, whether it's tornado warnings or updates on Helene, constantly and continuously. So any of your devices or anything that you might use to get our streaming or to get streaming, you'll be able to get us as well. We will be there for you with the latest information. And so tonight, this is all about talking about Helene, and that's what I'm going to do. Primarily local impacts for Jacksonville, Northeast Florida, and Southeast Georgia, which will be a lot worse than areas to the west, where this is going to be a very rough storm, unfortunately. But I'll also address some of the outlying areas besides us, and I'll try to get to a few questions. But we got a lot to cover, a lot to do, and I've got to be ready for that 10 o'clock newscast when things begin. So we'll just have I'll probably spend not much more a few minutes on questions. But right now, 430 miles southwest of Tampa, Florida, as of the 8 o'clock advisory. Winds at about 85 miles per hour. That's a Category 1 hurricane. The pressure's been dropping slowly and somewhat steadily. It's certainly not rapidly intensifying, and I'll show you why here in a minute. Movement is to the north, so it has made the move toward the north, the turn toward the north. And here's the core and the structure of Helene. And notice right in here, there's been this little dry slot. That was ingested in the hurricane late this afternoon and really hasn't totally been washed away, if you will. And that's likely causing some structural issues for Helene right now, and that's why it's not rapidly intensifying. It really isn't expected to rapidly intensify until during the day tomorrow. So this is not anything real unusual. It also had a little bit of land interaction with the Yucatan Peninsula briefly this afternoon, so that's been an inhibiting factor. But we are seeing less dry air overall, and obviously some banding features developing here. And way out on its extremities here, there are bands of showers and thunderstorms that are lifting northward up into Florida. These are not directly related to Helene, but will cause some very heavy rain at times, and unfortunately adding to the flooding woes that we're going to have later tomorrow night into early Friday. You can see all those bands here, as the breadth of Helene is really quite impressive. It has expanded considerably today, great deal today. And the eastern part of it is going, as is typically the case, be the most dangerous part of the storm. And Jacksonville, Northeast Florida, and Southeast Georgia will be in that portion of the storm. But realize when I say that, we are far from taking a direct hit in Jacksonville, Northeast Florida, and Southeast Georgia. This will not be a direct hit. It will be for the Panhandle. Panhandle. And there's that skinny cone. Remember that the impacts occur far away from the center of the storm and far outside of the cone. So the cone is simply a track forecast, and that is it. The skinny cone just means high confidence track forecast. That's it. Because beyond that, things get much, the damage can be much greater, well beyond that. And I'll show you that here in a minute. But it is forecast right now to be a Cat 4 by tomorrow evening at about this time, approaching the Florida Panhandle. Landfall looks to be anywhere from about 9 p.m. to midnight, give or take. All preparations, all precautions should be completed by tomorrow morning. And in fact, travel is an issue too. So I'm going to take you into some of the travel issues that we're looking at. And I like this map. Corey threw this together, and I like it a lot. I-95, for example, which goes through Jacksonville, the East Coast Interstate through East Florida, Southeast Georgia. This area will have breezy winds. There'll be an isolated tornado threat, and there'll be heavy rain. It's not going to be a picnic along the I-95 corridor, but it's not going to be as severe as points west. You'll be able to get around. You'll be able to travel, but just obviously using extra care. Now, I-75 is a completely different beast. And from near Tampa to Atlanta, it's advisable really not to travel on I-75 tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night into early Friday, and especially from the Florida border or near there up into Georgia, because the Hurricane Helene is expected to move right up toward Macon and then start to curve back to the northwest near Atlanta. This is a significant hit for Atlanta, unusually significant, because obviously they're way inland. But this hurricane, by hurricane standards, will be moving fast. It'll be intense, so it's going to take a while to wind down. In fact, it's forecast to still be a Cat 1 hurricane upon approach to Macon, and a strong tropical storm while moving into Atlanta, with tornadoes all along its path and flooding rain. So I-75 is troublesome here, especially from the Florida-Georgia border northward to Atlanta, but all the way south toward Tampa as well. So that's a tough stretch. And then I-10, obviously, the closer you get to the center of the storm, it's even more difficult. Hurricane-force winds, very heavy rain, a few tornadoes. From about Live Oak west of Tallahassee, I suspect I-10 will be shut down for a while, perhaps tomorrow night into Friday, depending on how much damage there is on Friday and what's left behind and what kind of cleanup there is. But I-10, the best advice on I-10 is to not travel it west of I-75 all the way to west of Tallahassee tomorrow night into Friday morning. I-10 for Duval County, completely different, of course. It's not near as significant a storm for Jacksonville as it is points west. But I-10 is problematic. And, of course, we have a lot of parents with kids that have college students at Florida State and other universities in and around Tallahassee. So those kiddos, if they're coming home or leaving Tallahassee, should do so tonight and tomorrow morning and have travel completed by noon is the best advice for tomorrow when you get west of I-75, where the worst conditions are going to be over northwest Florida into the Panhandle. Closer to Jacksonville and the I-95 corridor, you'll be able to travel through this whole ordeal, but realize there will be bands of heavy rain, low visibility, difficult travel. Boy, these poor folks west of I-10, Live Oak included, west of Tallahassee. It's had a rough last 13 months or so. And Corey also just put together very recently a nice graphic on the major hurricanes of the last 10 years, so going back to 2014. And 2014 through 2016 weren't particularly intense for Florida, but we did have in 2017 Irma, of course, which hit the Keys first, then moved up the west coast of Florida, delivered the greatest flood to downtown Jacksonville since the mid-1800s. We then also had Ian, just 2022, just 5 years, 2 years ago would be Ian. Moved up into southwest Florida at Fort Myers Beach and then cut to the northeast. Terrible Category 4, not far from Cat 5 landfall at Fort Myers Beach. And then 6 years ago, it's 2018, a catastrophic Cat 5 Michael into Mexico Beach in the Panhandle. And this is not this Michael is kind of a similar situation as Helene looks like it's going to be. Michael was moved out of the Northwest Caribbean, just like Helene. Quickly developed from a tropical storm to a Cat 5. Helene looks like it's going to at least Cat 3, if not Cat 4. So kind of similar, and also into the Panhandle, but more east than Michael was. And then just last year, Dahlia, a Category 3 landfall in the eastern Panhandle. And earlier this year, Debbie was not a particularly powerful hurricane necessarily, but Category 2 into the Big Bend in early August. So it's for by any standards, the hurricanes have been active, but the major hurricanes have been pretty significant for Florida over the last 10 years, and really especially since 2017. I thought that was a handy and interesting map to look at. So let's take a look at your impacts for Jacksonville, northeastern Florida, and southeast Georgia. This is a little wider view first. A lot of color here, lots of stuff going on, but I like what this tells, the story that it tells. In the yellow areas, we're calling it a manageable impact. In other words, you're going to be able to get around still for the most part. And once the storm exits on Friday, you're in good shape. And by the way, the underside of Helene is going to disappear late tomorrow night into Friday as it moves inland. Dry continental air will get wrapped into the hurricane, and when that happens, the underside in particular dries out very quickly. The heavy rain will shift to the north side, northeast, north, and northwest side, and will dry out. And Friday is really a very pretty day, all things considered. But they're still in the yellow shading here, the I-95 corridor and much of Duval County, south to Palatka, north to Folkestone and Brunswick. You're looking at 40-plus mile-an-hour wind gusts, some coastal flooding, some rain, heavy rain, a few tornadoes, isolated outages, power outages, but not widespread. In the orange, a little bit higher impacts right along the coast because it's along the coast. The wind is a little stronger because there's no friction from land, or very little, so damaging wind gusts will be possible, flooding rains, a few tornadoes, some power outages. And then the more west you get and closer to the center, obviously we up the ante, right? So Blackshear and Waycross in Georgia, down through the western half of Baker County, just west of McClenny, down to just west of Stark, just west of Highway 301, the impacts are greater. And then you get to the red, which is just west of Lake City and Valdosta and Tallahassee and nearby areas, the Big Bend. You're talking about extreme impacts with widespread destructive winds and flooding rains, major power outages, tree issues, coastal storm surge. It'll be a while before they completely recover in that red shaded area. And then along the St. Johns River, we'll have some flooding as well, which we're already having because we have the naturally high tides this time of year. King tides, they're called. Those will go all the way through November and to some extent into December. And then you throw in a little east wind, and a lot of east wind recently, all the rain of the last few weeks. And the St. Johns River will have some flooding up and down its extent here from eastern Duval south all the way to Palatka. And realize that tomorrow, late day into the evening, there'll be a very strong south wind blowing up the St. Johns River, and all that water will come piling up toward downtown, and some of it will overflow, especially if it corresponds with any heavy rain. It will be near high tide tomorrow evening. So that's a time when downtown Jacksonville, Riverside in particular, but to some degree San Marco, will experience some flooding with the St. Johns River. Not to the extent that we saw with Irma, but there will be some flooding the way it looks tomorrow late day, and especially in the evening and overnight downtown and along the St. Johns River. So that's the wider view. And then as we look at just northeast Florida and southeast Georgia, here's that view that I was talking about with the orange right at the coast and then a yellow shading, and then you get back to the orange where the winds will be stronger, closer to the center, and the impacts are going to be a little bit greater, a fair amount greater, actually, the way it looks. I have some of the peak winds here. We've been working on this map for you as well, and this helps us quite a bit in breaking down the wind potential. Again, the I-95 corridor, furthest removed from the center, the eye of Helene, and not right along the coast. So winds averaging 25 to 35 miles per hour sustained at their peak tomorrow and tomorrow night. Gusts, though, 45 to 55 plus miles per hour. Bridges should stay open unless certain cities and municipalities and counties make their own independent decisions. A little bit higher again right along the coast because of less friction, and then it increases again at Highway 301. And then once you get to the I-75 corridor, those winds are stronger, 50 to 60 sustained, gusts 70 to 80. Again, all of this is tomorrow afternoon and especially tomorrow night. And Helene's moving quickly, so Friday off into Georgia and rapidly improving weather conditions. Really strong winds, obviously, at landfall and inland for a ways. This is a big hit, it would appear, for Tallahassee. We have a tornado threat to go with this as well. So we will show you where our strongest threat for tornadoes are going to be. And this is looking like a fairly significant tornado threat for tomorrow. And tomorrow night, by especially our standards, because we just don't get a lot of tornadoes, obviously, in northeast Florida and southeast Georgia. But with tropical systems, that changes. But there is a red shading here for southeast Georgia. The rest of the area is in an orange shading. And I would expect, by our standards, fairly long-track tornadoes for a time tomorrow and tomorrow night. And there may be an isolated water spout or tornado tonight, too. That's why we'll be fully staffed around the clock in the First Alert Weather Center. But pretty significant tornado threat. We're on the east side. The circulation, that's the tornadic side of hurricanes. The shear is pretty strong. strong, very strong. Once the Helene gets into Georgia, though, that'll cut off the tornado threat. And again, it is a dramatically improved weather day on Friday. I'll show you the can and cannot do's. Friday is probably going to be one of the last things that I show you. And then finally, I wanted to show you how much it's going to rain. That's a good question always, right? So this is one of our in-house, so to speak, our own CBS 47, Fox 30, Action News Jax rainfall model estimates, and I like it in general. Don't get too caught up in exact numbers and exact locations, because there will be some range, obviously, especially from I-95 to the beaches, where it's just not going to be as steady. The bands of rain and storms will increase through the day tomorrow, and each one will contain some gusty winds and an isolated tornado threat, and then that becomes more and more persistent and widespread through the afternoon and evening, and then cuts off very quickly across the area late tomorrow night into early Friday. But you can see generally a 1 to 2, some occasional 3-inch amounts from Highway 301 to I-95 to the coast. But once you get to Lake City to Waycross, it's 4 to 5 inches. Locally, there'll be probably a half foot. And then when you get into the Panhandle on up into Georgia, where the eye is going to be headed, now you're talking 5 to 9 inches. Again, as tropical systems go, this is not as wet as it could be, and that's simply and purely because of the speed of movement. It is going to be racing northward by tropical standards at some 20 miles per hour when it makes landfall. Now, as it goes into Georgia, it slows down, and even more so when it gets to Tennessee. And we need to make sure people in Tennessee and Western Carolinas and much of Georgia realize this could be a very major hit as far as flooding in particular is concerned, but also winds and tornadoes. But there are parts of the Appalachians here that could be seeing 2 feet of rain from Helene, because as it moves to the north and northwest and slows down, it's going to slow a great deal here. It's being driven by a dip in the jet stream, an upper-level trough that's dropping down into the southern U.S. right now. That trough is what's helping pick it up and pull it to the north. It's also what's going to help it accelerate. But then through the end of the week and the weekend, that trough, that upper-level trough, just kind of sits here, doesn't do much, and Helene gets captured into it. While it's lost its energy source, the hot, warm Gulf of Mexico water, it still, though, will have enough energy to produce heavy rain, and it's not moving much. So Tennessee into the western Carolinas and Georgia, this could be quite severe. And even heavy rain extending as far north and west as south of St. Louis, parts of northeastern Arkansas, northward all the way up towards Cincinnati, a good part of Kentucky. So from a rainfall standpoint, this is really going to be a major thing beyond Florida, whereas Florida doesn't get as much rain, but of course Florida gets the very high winds because that's where landfall is going to be. So I mentioned I would end with what you can do, so to speak. I told you, we showed you the shaded areas where there's going to be the heaviest rain and the most severe impacts. For Jacksonville on Friday, this is Friday now. You're going to be able to get out. Now, I know a lot of things have been canceled, postponed, whatever you want to call it. People on Friday are going to be like, what in the world? There's all kind. It is going to be a nice day Friday. All I can do is forecast the weather. It's up to people to make the decisions and to do what they're going to do. Behavior, wouldn't even want to try to modify or change. Well, I would like to in some cases, but I can't, right? So this is what you're going to be able to do on Friday, and it's virtually everything. Infrastructure should not be seriously damaged across northeast Florida and southeast Georgia. You'll be able to get to the gas station, to the bank. You'll be able to travel. You'll be able to get to the airport. Now, there are likely to be airport delays. Individual airlines will be canceling and postponing flights, no doubt. And with the big hit that Atlanta is expected to take, there'll be a ripple effect from that big hub across much of the country, but in Jacksonville too. So that's going to be a concern. But otherwise, you'll be able to get around. Airport will stay open and be in good shape. And I just don't see this. Now, individual neighborhoods that happen to get an isolated tornado, all bets are off then. That's a much bigger deal, right? That's a tough thing. So there will be small areas of more considerable damage, but this is a general view and outlook as what you can or cannot do. Now, when you get more inland, say Waycross to Lake City, now all bets are off. And Blackshear, nearby areas, because now you're talking about more significant impacts, longer lasting power outages, more debris, more flooding, and then you get more west of here, you get to Live Oak and out west from there. It's days of cleanup, if not even longer. And realize that the power companies will be doing what they can to get everybody back online. But that's just simply not going to be an easy task for the power companies, given the magnitude of the storm and given the intensity of the storm, and has to let the weather's got to improve before they can actually get back out there. So that's going to be a little bit of a bugaboo, no doubt, when it comes to the cleanup effort. So give those utility crews a break and realize that that's not going to be an easy road to go. All right, so let me take a look at some of the questions. If I can see all of my, can see any comments here. I'm not seeing it right here. If Amanda, our content manager, is working, maybe she could just come in here and read a few comments because I'm not seeing them pop up here. I could try also, let's see, I'm going to switch to Action News Jax instead of and Amanda, I think, is walking in here because I just heard the door. It's Amanda walking into the studio. Do you have the comments with you by any chance? Okay, good question. And Amanda, if you just want to walk out here and tell me a few questions, I'll take them. Okay. And then we're going to call it. And Amanda does great work, by the way. She's in our content center right now, works on all of our social media, and actually a Jill of all trades. She does really great work for us, so really appreciate it. But one of her things that she was talking about was when people need to be in their safe place. Well, realize and that's a great question, realize that in Jacksonville, Northeast Florida, Southeast Georgia, the damage does not look like it'll be so severe that you're not going to be able to get around. Now, if you have a big old oak tree over your house, you may want to, that's something you have to consider if you live in an exceptionally flood-prone area. But there are not any evacuation orders anywhere in Northeast Florida and Southeast Georgia right now. There could be some, I suppose, in some of the lowest-lying areas, but we don't have any evacuation orders right now. So if there are, then you should heed that advice from officials if you happen to live in an evacuation zone. Important to know your zone. Now, I mentioned early on, if you're traveling, that's a different thing. West on I-10, all travel should be completed near and west of Lake City by noon tomorrow. All hurricane preparations should be done by noon tomorrow, whether it's Northeast Florida and Southeast Georgia or further to the west where the impacts are far greater. But picking up stuff, putting it inside, making sure it's secure is a good thing to do. Your neighbors will appreciate it especially because that just becomes windborne debris when the winds really start to howl. When you get west of I-75, everything should be completed by at least noon tomorrow and preferably sunrise tomorrow. So the hours are counting down. Don't wait too long. In the Panhandle and the Big Bend of Florida, Helene is not something to mess with. This is such a major storm potentially in the Panhandle versus Jacksonville. Go ahead, Amanda.
Some people were asking, as I kind of asked you before,
all right,
should I go to work tomorrow?
Okay.
Like appointments.
That's a good question, too. And by the way, I know we're getting a lot of individual, what's happening in my neighborhood, my town, my city. Yes. I just went through all that pretty well. So I'm not going to go through each and every little city in question. And I realize I realize that's a logical question, and I get it. But I showed you all those maps, and I'll be sending out county by county. I'll be posting those on my Facebook page, and I'm sure Amanda will reshare them as well. But that's not, the design is to kind of more broad questions, and this is a good one. Should I cancel appointments tomorrow? What about places I got to go? Jacksonville, Northeast Florida, and Southeast Georgia, you'll be able to get around. But as we go through the day, the winds get stronger, each band gets stronger, there will be periods of heavy rain, and there is that tornado threat. Now, most people aren't going to see a tornado. But the places that do, that's pretty significant. And they'll be moving quickly, 40, 45, maybe 50 miles per hour. So that's the kind of thing you're going to want to be aware of and realize you're going to have to deal with. If you don't want to deal with any of that, you shouldn't travel after noon tomorrow. If you don't mind traveling through a rain band and then hearing about a tornado warning and having to take action, you can get around and get about. You'll be able to get from point A to point B tomorrow night in our local area of Northeast Florida and Southeast Georgia, but there'll be periods of some very heavy rain, gusty winds, and that isolated tornado threat. By Friday, you can go to everything you want if it hasn't been shut down. Skies will be clearing, the sun will be out, it'll be breezy, somewhat hot, but really Friday, it's amazing how quickly we're going to go from rainy and stormy tomorrow and tomorrow night to sunny skies on Friday. And realize there are some bands of showers and a few storms already that have been moving through the area tonight and will continue. That's not directly related to Helene, but will produce some heavy rain, gusty winds. Some other good questions.
Let me see. Oh, I did get a question about winds earlier today.
And
who should be when will the winds be coming?
Yep.
Who will be most concerned?
So Amanda says questions about winds and timing it. It's for the beaches and areas west of Jacksonville, that's much more wind, 40, 50 miles per hour with gusts 60 to 70, while the I-95 corridor, including the rest of Duval County, is more like 35 to 40, maybe 45 with gusts above 50 miles per hour. Bridges, for the most part, should be able to stay open unless certain local municipalities and cities and county decisions are made that are different, and that could happen, has happened. And then the strongest winds and the greatest impacts overall are noon tomorrow to midnight tomorrow night. So there's about a 12-hour period. Now, there'll be some rain bands ahead of that, as I talked about tonight, into tomorrow morning. And there'll even be a few after midnight tomorrow night. But I think really prime time, so to speak, is noon to midnight tomorrow. And especially from roughly 3, 4 in the afternoon to midnight or a little after. So tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night. Landfall looks to be roughly 9 to midnight in the eastern panhandle right now of Helene, the actual eye. Anything?
People are asking.
Okay, hang on a second. Okay, that's great. Okay.
Probably do your cut-in while you're.
Okay. Yep, very good. We're going to do a cut-in. My director's just talking to my ear. We're going to do a cut-in at 9 o'clock, which is just a minute away or so. So I'm going to do one more question, and then we'll briefly go to a black screen, but come right back up with my live update on Helene, and then we'll go back, and I'll finish up the Facebook Live another question or two. Is there one you have right there for me right now before? And Brian, just tell me in my ear when we got to go to the cut-in.
What time will we be wall-to-wall tomorrow?
What? I'm sorry?
What time will we be wall-to-wall?
Good question. What time will we wall-to-wall tomorrow and tomorrow night? We'll be wall-to-wall as soon as the tornado warning is issued in our viewing area. So that could be any time tonight, through the day tomorrow, and into tomorrow night. That we know will happen. We're pretty confident, unfortunately, that there's going to be tornado warnings. And then we'll be on wall-to-wall for that. We'll stream it. We'll be on all those things out there that people can stream from, which would include what, Amanda? Goodness gracious. YouTube, Facebook, Roku.
Oh, I think you're getting a signal.
Okay. What else?
Amazon.
Apple TV, yep, good one. Did I say YouTube? We said YouTube, I think. So all those platforms where you can stream, if we're streaming, you'll see it. And during the tornado warning, that'll happen. Now, will we go wall to wall? Otherwise, there's a chance. But we also have a lot of newscasts, live newscasts in the morning till 9 o'clock, noon, 4, 5, 5:30, 6, 6:30, 10, 10:30, 11, and all those things will continue normally scheduled. But so we'll break in wall to wall when and if the weather looks particularly severe, and certainly for tornado warnings. So stay tuned on that. We are now 30 seconds out from a live, less than 30, breaking Helene update on our CBS and 47 TV station. So just hang with us on the Facebook Live. We'll do that update and then come back to the Facebook Live.
From Action News Jackson First Alert Weather, this is a storm update on Helene.
Good evening. I'm Action News Jack's Chief Meteorologist Mike Buresh. Just a quick update. Hurricane Helene with the latest numbers now, 85 miles per hour, headed to the north. It's made that northward turn. It will move more northeast with time, with a landfall in the central and eastern Florida Panhandle about this time tomorrow night, anywhere from about 9 to midnight. On that track, the greatest impacts will be in the Panhandle of northwest Florida, but there still will be fringe impacts for Jacksonville, northeast Florida, and southeast Georgia, with strong and gusty winds, some periods of heavy rain, and some isolated tornadoes as well, and some flooding too. So all those will have to be considered as we go through the day Thursday and Thursday night before we see rapidly improving conditions on Friday. All of your latest First Alert weather and updates on Helene begin at 10 p.m. on Fox 30, Action News Jax at 11 p.m. on CBS 47. We're always online, actionnewsjax.com. You can download for free the First Alert Weather app and on the radio, 104.5 WOKV. We'll see you in 1 hour.
This has been a storm update on Helene. Stay with Action News Jackson First Alert Weather for continuous updates on TV, on our First Alert Weather app, and streaming 24/7 on Action News Jax Now.
Okay, so we're just going to finish up our Facebook Live now this evening after that live update on the TV side. And Amanda's got a couple of questions, and then we're going to call it a good night. But, of course, that doesn't mean we're leaving. We're still going to be here for you.
Yes.
And my Facebook account is at Mike First Alert, by the way. Also on Twitter, or some people like to call it X. And on Instagram, it's all at Mike First Alert. You'll see some of the graphics we're pushing out there and updates on Helene. Flooding. So we are concerned about flooding, but because of the speed of the movement of Helene, that's going to help us from the rainfall standpoint. The rainfall totals just simply will not be that great. Having said that, we of course are saturated after a very wet September. So the ground's wet, trees will be uprooted a little easier, but we've at least been dry the last week for the most part, and that's going to help us out some. There will also be some river flooding along the St. Johns River and its tributaries, especially at times of high tide, and especially at this time tomorrow night when we have a howling south wind coming into downtown Jacksonville. Some of that river water is going over the banks into downtown Jacksonville and nearby areas, Riverside especially, but also San Marco. And that would be our greatest concern. Pretty quickly abating, though, or going down on Friday.
We do have
Okay.
Becky says we are already experiencing flooded roads on A1A Ormond Beach, so just
Yes.
south of our viewing area.
Yeah, A1A Ormond Beach, you're looking at flooding already, and some of that is higher than average water levels, especially at times of high tide because of the king tide and east wind, and some heavy rainfall. There's been heavier rainfall in the Ormond Beach area so far this afternoon and evening versus, say, Jacksonville. So, yes, you are experiencing already some flooding. Expect that to even worsen some overnight into the day tomorrow, but then as Helene moves away, pretty rapid improvement later tomorrow night, and Ormond Beach is even further away from the center than Jacksonville is going to be, which helps out from a wind standpoint. How about one more question or comment, Amanda?
Lots of people saying thank you for all you do.
Sure, you're welcome. Thank you for watching.
Yeah. Let's see if we have one more question as well.
Okay.
Concerns about tornado threats.
Okay, and there is a concern about tornado threats. That's a great question. We are in the north and east quadrant of the storm. So as Helene moves up toward the coast, the shear, it's low-level shear, really strong, and that adds up to waterspouts and tornadoes. So we do have a tornado threat overnight tonight already, but really picking up tomorrow and tomorrow evening, and that will quickly end after midnight tomorrow night. So our greatest concern with tornadoes is now through tomorrow morning, and then particularly noon tomorrow to about midnight. And again, we'll update you immediately if a tornado warning is issued in northeast Florida or southeast Georgia. Warning means you need to take action. There's tornadoes on the way, potentially. A watch means conditions are favorable. And remember, warnings can be issued when there's actually no confirmed tornado on the ground yet. We're seeing rotation in the clouds, tornado warning is issued, and then we have to be vigilant as to whether or not a tornado might form. So we are going to keep you updated. Amanda Winkle, again, priceless in the Content Center. Thank you so much. Does great work for us. Works tirelessly. Nicely done, Amanda. I know you weren't expecting to be up here tonight, so thank you for your help always. Yeah, she's wearing a jacket because the TV stations are typically very cold. She's right. I'm just amped up, of course, so I always feel like it's pretty toasty in here, a lot of lights. And but Amanda does great work, and thank you. Corey Sim has been in the background working on graphics. He's finally going to get a chance to go home for the rest of the night, hopefully, and I'll be here until Garrett gets in after midnight, but then Garrett will take over. Trevor will be in here, Trevor Gibbs, to help out in the morning as well. Corey and I return by midday to the early afternoon tomorrow, and then we'll stay with you through tomorrow night until Helene's moving into Georgia, and we're getting in that dry underside. You can always find us then on CBS 47, Fox 30 Action News Jax. We begin at 10 p.m. tonight. Online, actionnewsjax.com/weather/hurricane. Talking the Tropics with Mike. I update it multiple times when it's busy, but certainly every day during the hurricane season all the way through the end of November. It begins with what's going to happen right here at home and the Buresh bottom line, and then goes through a bunch of weather, sometimes nerdy stuff, but you might find it interesting. It's Talking the Tropics with Mike. You can find it at actionnewsjax.com and our free First Alert weather app, which you should download right now. It'll give you updates, warnings, advisories immediately as they are issued. And on the radio, 104.5 WOKV. I'll be there live tomorrow morning beginning at 7 a.m. Stay safe, be smart, and stay calm. We're going to get through this one just fine. Might want to say a prayer for our folks and friends and family, loved ones, if you have them there in the Panhandle and the Big Bend of Florida, on up into Georgia, the Western Carolinas, and Tennessee, into what looks to be a major hit from Hurricane Helene. A thank you, too, to our control room. How could I forget? Brian is in the control room, working very hard as a director, making sure everything works properly. And Brian Benetti does wonderful work in the control room as well. And so he helps us get through something like this extra work in an evening as Helene makes its approach. From the CBS 47 and Fox 30 Action News Jax First Alert Weather Center, with all your weather all the time, I'm Chief Meteorologist Mike Buresh.